right, well, I guess we'll get started.
Okay.
Others may wander in because of the time change, so that's fine.
Or not.
Or not, yeah. All right, well, today we'll be starting with, this is still finishing up, I think it's lesson 7, yeah. Sins of the tongue, all that kind of good stuff.
Oh, is that what I missed?
What's that?
Is that what I missed?
No, you didn't miss that.
This is, oh.
That's where we're starting. You did not miss it. So, he labels sins of the tongue as any speech that tends to tear down another person. Which sounds about right. And he has a variety of different ones that he talks about, and then I found some others. But the first one that he talks about is gossip. He says that is spreading of unfavorable information about someone else, even if it is true. And it's often based on rumor. Just because it's true doesn't mean it's favorable. Something could be true about somebody and it not be a really favorable thing. So, yeah. So, two things. Can gossip be disguised in the form of a prayer request?
Oh, absolutely.
And why? What makes it gossip then?
Because the person who's asking for prayer about that is usually a relative of the person they're asking for, and they spill too much.
Okay.
I mean, if my daughter needs prayer, I keep it really short. It's my daughter, and I think it's personal. Sometimes if someone asks for prayer for their daughter, I'll say, just give me your name. I don't need to know. God already knows that I'll be in her prayer. That's all I need.
True. Yeah.
I don't need to know about my neighbors' details. They need prayer.
Yeah. And sometimes they might tell you, and that doesn't necessarily mean you need to include those details when you're...
Because they're telling you,
Right.
and probably in confidence.
Right. Yeah. So, on the same note then, how do you deal with someone who wants to gossip with you?
Sometimes I get involved. I'm sad to say that.
You have to be very aware to not get sucked in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my husband works with all women. It's he comes home to tell me everything, so he doesn't go back to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He tells me everything, and I don't know if that's
And you
gossip,
just
but
stop- let
I
it
think he just
stop.
needs a vetting board just
Right.
to get it all out.
Yeah.
Because it's just so they're so petty and just different things. This person doesn't like this person. And, oh no, this.
One of his first jobs was working in a sewing factory. All women. And
I know what they're like.
yeah, so
Oh yeah,
We were
their
first-
language was worse than any guy I
It's a
ever
little,
dealt
it's a
with.
little rough.
Yeah.
so all the girl tricks that I tried, he already knew about, and he wasn't going to put up with it.
Right.
Just to catch you up, we're talking about gossip. So we're gossiping about gossip.
Good. It's good to see you up.
Thank you.
Yeah, but mine's down now.
Oh no! I've heard so many people with the flu.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be going around. So yeah, we were just discussing
We're talking about you.
how
Oh, that's why I got quiet. Okay,
how you deal with somebody who wants to gossip with you.
I still need an answer to that. Besides what you said, you need to be very aware that this is what's going on. You know what you said?
Something to that order.
Yeah.
It's hard.
That's how it
Yeah, it's
translates.
hard.
Well, sometimes
I
you
guess
can be
the
having
better
a
question-
conversation and gossip slips in, where where do you stop that, where you're talking to somebody.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I guess the question is, how do you shut it down? when you know it's coming. It's tough.
Let's go back to the prayer, and they want to gossip, and you want to shut it down.
That was the other question.
I have
Can a
a-
prayer
a-
request turn into gossip?
A dear friend who asked me that in relation to a women's prayer group. And she said, as the leader, she says, thank you for that. Before she can ramble on 3 more paragraphs, let's move on to the next person. So simple. You're probably hurting their feelings, but that's because you shut them off and they wanted to spill. But they need to learn, because in the beginning of the meeting, she says, we're not here to gossip. She sets a stage, whether they get on with it or not.
It's up to the person that's facilitating that at that point, because I don't remember what lesson it's in, but there's a story in here that he relates. A pastor friend of his decided to do I think it was a Saturday morning men's prayer group. And when they got together, instead of praying, the guys actually started gossiping. And, in the guise of a prayer request. But the pastor was so disappointed that eventually he just said, okay, we're done, and stopped it. Because they weren't praying about any of the needs for the church or this or that. They were, going off on these other tangents.
What did he stop? The meetings?
The meeting. He cut that meeting off at that point. That's rather drastic, but I guess he felt he needed to do something because it wasn't achieving what the goal of the group was to start with. And it turned into more of a gossip and things that were going on outside the church that he really wasn't looking for at that point. So, yeah. Yeah, it can be tough. We've been in prayer groups where it kind of descends into a little bit of a gossip fest. Yeah, and that's hard.
Well, let's just talk about being at somebody's house and they want to gossip. What do we do? Do we
Yeah.
leave?
Yeah.
I think sometimes what I do, I have a coworker, she doesn't do with me much anymore. I listened, and then I didn't have a comment, and then I would just kind of find a word or two to say, and then leave.
Yeah.
And then since I'm not a participant, she doesn't do it anymore with me.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, you talk about a coworker and gossiping. Where I was working, the one girl got fired because she knew things about people because of her position, and she would tell other people about it. Yeah, she got fired.
It's I work in the personnel department, so it can be tricky.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have to listen to some of the things, but,
Yeah.
but it's the motive behind it. I don't
Right.
feel the motive. The motive is just
But you're not going and telling everyone
No,
else, so
no.
that's.
No.
And that's the other key point when you're talking about gossip and even prayer requests. What's the motive behind it? What's the motive behind relaying that prayer request? Is it to actually relay the prayer request, or is it actually to spread some little juicy nuggets about somebody? You don't know. You really don't know the other person's motive behind it. So yeah, good stuff. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next one, which is even more fun. Slander. Making false statements or misrepresentations about another person that damages their reputation. He made a note in here, and I wrote this one down. As Christians, we can slander when we question another believer's commitment or misrepresent their stance on a subject.
Sometimes I think slander is because we don't have all the facts, but we think we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, what he was saying there about Christians, that slander leads into gossip. Because now you're misrepresenting
You're
somebody's.
assuming something that's
Right.
not there.
You're assuming facts that are not available. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's. You can question things in the church, but you can do it without slandering the person that you might be looking at. There could be some questions in different things that are going on in a church environment. So, but again, we have to be careful with that so that we don't turn that into slander or gossip and so forth and so on.
I think we have to be very careful about what we believe that we see in the media. Whether it's television, online, your newspaper, you don't get everything. There's so much behind the story, but we want to believe, oh, they did that. Well, they should be fired. There's just so much. And then there's also too much. An example of that is Mr. Heller, who's been in the paper every day. And then he went down to 3 times a week with his picture. Who? For 3 months.
The ATM guy.
Guy that owned, see?
Owned
Good
ATMs.
for you.
And
I
he's-
have a
yeah, it's-
newspaper, and he's right
yeah.
there in the front page
Yeah.
it was every day for a long time.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where you get tidbits of a story. I remember I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh a lot. One of the things I always liked about him was he would say, "Don't take my word for it, do your own homework." That's the way it should be. Do your homework before you decide you want to say something about somebody. And I mean, that leads right into the next one, which is critical speech, which is negative comments about someone that probably are true, but really don't need to be said. So, you know, there's things about everybody that are true that we don't really need to talk about or bring up in conversation and that type of thing. So, it's so easy for us to get caught up in the sins of the tongue, especially gossip or those little white lies that everybody talks about. So, but this one kind of comes home a little bit. In the work environment, have you ever had harsh words, insults, and or have been ridiculed by someone? And if so, how did you react?
Resigned. And that makes me sad because it was,
Yeah.
you know, when I think about it, it was many years ago. And it was my favorite job that I've ever had. And the fact that I caved makes me sad. And it's a chicken's way out.
Well, sometimes that might be all you can
Sometimes.
do.
I was gonna say sometimes that's the choice
Yeah.
you have to make.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you had talked about the project you handed in and it kind of tore it apart, but I get the impression it wasn't done in a
No.
nasty.
No, they're trying to be
Critical.
constructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of them are a little bit more harsh by nature than others, but you know that, right? I knew that going into it, so
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah.
That does help.
Yeah.
Being a little much more grounded in the word and a little more mature in your relationships. And yeah.
Yeah. I have had to tell someone that, you know, you were a little short with your comments there, and they probably weren't proper for a business setting. And that kind of helps. That diffuses it a little bit because you're not just coming right out and saying, "Hey, you know, you were just downright nasty," that type of thing. So yeah, there's things we can do to downplay that.
I wonder if just because this recently, the opposite happened. I was in a meeting with some partners. I lead it, and my boss is always on the calls too. And it kind of came at us with some heavy hit questions. that were definitely led by gossip on their end. And I mean, it took everything in me to just smile, talk through it, share where our position is on things, and hold our ground, but in a very positive way. Yeah, we'll look into that. Hey, thanks for sharing your comments.
Right.
So that all happened. I was kind of a mess afterwards because I don't know how I held it together during that meeting. It just happened this week, and my boss, I would say in the past, I would at times be like, are you kidding me right now in the meeting, and kind of get a little short. But this time it just it wasn't right, but we were trying to become partners with them. So I was like, no, we need to just hold my own emotions myself. And in that, like in the past, my boss has shared with me constructive criticism, like, hey, you know, in that situation, we need to do X, Y, Z.
Right.
And so for a long time, all I heard was negative stuff from her. But after that call, she called me immediately, just the two of us, and was like, I can't believe how well that went for you. She's like, I'm really impressed with how you handled it. What a difference. And all of a sudden, like after the call, we hung up, and I was like, that's like the first time in a long time that it was a positive thing, and it makes me want to do that 100 times now, right? So like,
Right.
if all we do is see when someone's doing something bad, and we come to them and say, hey, we see it, let's
Right.
work on maybe not doing that,
Yeah.
that's all they're going to hear us say.
Yeah.
And I know my boss has done more intentional on when something is good, that's when she's saying it, and it's making me want to do those things instead of like, oh, let me see how we can disappoint her again. you
Yeah.
know? So I'm taking that in correlation to if we see somebody who's struggling, if we see somebody who's saying things they shouldn't, or confronting things that they don't, the second they do something good or positive, be like, hey, let's talk about that more. I love where we're going with this, and encourage that conversation, and try to just, when the other part happens, just say, I don't have space for that in my life right now, but when you're ready to talk honestly and nicely, let's talk. I don't know. Focus on the positive instead of the negative, which isn't always easy, especially if there's not much positive happening.
Yeah. Positive reinforcement is always better than negative. I'll use what I had done for years. I was a safety manager. Nobody wants to see the safety guy. So when I would go out to job sites, instead of focusing on the negatives, I would focus on what they were doing right. And then I would say, but here's something else we need to work on.
Right.
So at least I gave the positive first, and then everybody was fine with what was going on after that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's always better.
I feel like if we're trying to get someone to not speak wrong of someone, or I don't know, maybe calling them out on it, they're gonna say, are you speaking wrong of me right now? Like they're gonna see it as an attack. I don't know.
Yeah.
So if there's any moment we could ever see them doing something positive, hey, let's talk for a half hour like this. You know, let's engage in that conversation.
So I was a front-end manager, Darren Camps. 4 stores, pleasant people to work for, and then when they closed, I transferred to Wise. Well,
that's a whole
Oh, that's
different
a whole,
culture.
yeah.
Well, I was also a front-end manager, but they would have like weekly phone calls for every front-end manager had to be on the phone.
Wow.
But they would call you out in front of everyone if you were doing something bad. Well, I kept doing it because I'm like, well, I'm not putting anybody, I didn't have any cashiers for like an hour and a half. And they wanted me to leave it that way. And I was like, nope. So
Yeah.
I just kept manually changing the schedule,
Yeah.
adding. But at least my boss had my back. Like,
That's always
we
good.
earned a personal phone call,
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
which was a lot easier
Earned
to
a person.
to express like, hey, this isn't working here,
Yeah.
But yeah, but I was too stunned to like say it in front of, how many people were on the phone? Like probably 40 to 50 people, and I'm like,
Yeah, and you get called out, yeah. That's never a good thing either.
no, and I don't like that.
And-
I bite my tongue.
Usually, as the safety guy, if there was one particular person that I would pull them aside. I would not do it in front of everybody and just talk to them.
Well, they don't have the time to go to every single store all over the place,
Right.
But I mean,
But
this is
still,
the way you get
yeah.
everybody all at
Yeah.
once. But
Yeah,
you know, can we have a personal phone call, da da da. It would be a lot more, or less critical. How's that?
I had a boss once years ago talking about critical spirit and so forth, that his idea of dealing with people who were doing something wrong was, while you have them down and you're scolding them, kick them again. And I was like, no. Usually you want to build them back up. Yeah, no, his was the exact opposite. Just, you have them down, stomp on them again. I was like, okay, no, that's not good. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, well, there are a couple other, I found this online, just talking about sins of the tongue. We covered gossip, critical speech, slander. This guy goes into a couple of different ones. Obviously, this is probably in the book somewhere. The lying tongue, the person who lies all the time. The next two were kind of interesting. He talks about the flattering tongue and the proud tongue. So he tied those together with the sin of pride, because you're building yourself up.
Let's put all three of those together. How do you handle a situation where you're in a group of people and one person is making things up about themselves to make them look better, but those things never happened? Like, oh, I was in the Marines. Well, yeah, look at me. And you're going to say, no, you weren't. But you're in a group of people. How do you deal with that?
Which is a flat out lie about being in the Marines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were in the Air Force or something, but they wanted to be a Marine, so that's what they said.
But they were in the military?
Yes. So how
They
about?
just lied about what branch.
Oh yeah, but that's serious.
Well, yeah.
So I'm
It's
making.
so far fetched. Like, what,
So
what prompts this?
it could be because they're insecure about sitting with a group of people, and they want to make themselves feel better about or they want to brag,
Well, yeah.
or their pride.
If they were saying they're Marine, that
But-
means you're tough.
Yeah.
If you're a Marine. Air
Yeah.
Force guy, not so much.
Would it work if, whatever the lie was, you would say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about that later, and then confront them in a loving way?
Right, yeah, for sure.
And we could do that with slander and gossip, and I'd really like to talk to you about that later, out of the way of like a personal phone call.
The crew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to what your position is with that person. Like you had
point.
talked about someone that you were like a parent figure to, and that person you've got to step in and
Oh, yeah.
and figure out how you can correct and figure it out. But I just think if that was someone who was the acquaintance in the situation, I don't know if I would even know how to tackle that one. I think I would even
That's their.
just let it sit. Like that seems so.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have a good point.
Yeah. it's
Yeah.
kind
What's
of
your
out there.
relationship with that person?
Well, and then tying right in with those, this came out as it was called the 9 sins of the tongue. The next two kind of would fit in too, because it's the overused tongue, that's someone who talks excessively, and the swift tongue, they're quick to speak. So again, that could be gossip, and then it comes in on the next page, backbiting, gossiping, cursing, and piercing. So, yeah.
You mentioned flattery in there, and I'm trying to just get my head around that, because on one hand, as someone like flattering another, I think if it's rooted in truth, there can be good to that. Like to encourage someone to build them up, to say good things about someone is good. But on the other hand, if someone else's personality is based around that, you don't want them to feel like, hey, I need to hear these good things to lead my happy life. Yeah, feel worth is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's just a fine line to walk on that, or how you
Probably,
handle
because
that.
some of the other stuff in this next lesson, there's a fine line too.
Yeah.
In respect to sins of the tongue, what he was referring to with the flattering tongue is you're flattering yourself.
True.
Because
Yeah.
it tied in
That's
with
true.
the boastful tongue, that you're talking about me.
And that's probably just negative the whole way.
Yeah, yeah. And that, a lot of these, as I was going through everything, going to go back quite a few lessons, are rooted in selfishness.
Yeah, very much.
It's all about me. So, yeah. Okay. Well, we'll move on to lesson 8. And the first thing I have on here is, how do you define self-control? How would you define it? I know what he said, but how would you define self-control?
Very difficult at times.
Yeah, it was not me.
Yeah, you're correct. Very much so. So, well, that's where he starts lesson 8 and goes from there. But I find it interesting because he talked about it in here. Solomon wrote quite frequently in Proverbs about self-control. Unfortunately, he didn't follow his own advice. I mean, this is a man that had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and towards the end, they all led him astray, which resulted in the nation of Israel being split after Solomon. So we had a king of Israel and a king of Judah. So that was all became from him at the end. The author defines self-control as governance or prudent control of one's decisions, cravings, impulses, emotions, and passions. Self-control is governance or prudent control of one's desires, cravings, impulses, emotions, and passions. And I can tell you what page that's on here in a minute. It's right at the beginning. That is on, yes, 182.
I looked down and
Okay,
my eyes
there it
looked
was.
right at it. I was like,
So, but then he goes further and says biblical self-control is dependent on the influence and enablement of the Holy Spirit. And I would tend to agree with him. You know, we all said self-control is difficult. It's even more difficult if we're not trying in some way to help get the Holy Spirit to help us get through self-control. So he had 3 areas that he talked about where he said Christians often fail in self-control. The first one is eating, drinking, food, what have you. And he said, tendency to continually give in to our desires for certain foods or drinks can lead to an unhealthy lifestyle. And it can, for sure. Are there areas in your lives where you find it difficult to deal with self-control? And if so, what do you do to deal with it? It's tough because he goes into other ones too that we'll go through. And these are all 3 that he said Christians have trouble with. The other one is temper. And he says that hot temper is a quick but intense burst of anger, often followed by a calm disposition, usually directed against anyone who displeases them.
that include my children?
Maybe. So, you know.
That's when you count to 10 before
Yeah.
you sleep.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I mean, you know, again, I don't know, maybe you've had, how would you deal with somebody that has a quick temper? I don't know if there's somebody you
Oh,
relate
myself,
with.
I hate to use my mother-in-law as an example. I'm telling you, I would just be so quick to snap back at comments she would make. But now when she visits for a week, I pray every night. And look at my watch, like when she leaving. And they stay in a hotel, so like that helps for her not to stay with us. And you know, more beneficial to have that break. Because there were just times when it would just be too long, and at the end it would just be this huge blow up, and it was awful.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, it can be tough, especially if the person with the hot temper is directing it at you.
no, I'm the one without
No,
time.
no, I know.
She's the one who was like telling me that my kids are brats and
Yeah.
like yeah. So like I was quick and I slapped her across the face and so it got into like pulling hair, like Jeff had to come out and that was very early on, like
Yeah.
but you know, maybe around year 10.
Yeah.
But ever since then, like she'll still complain to Jeff, I have pain in my ear because of that. I was like, oh my word, like stop, just stop. But yeah, sometimes a glass of wine helps, but yeah, just when she's here, I just, I asked my mom tribe, I'm like, just pray for me this week because, and I do, I bite my tongue a lot. I hold back, so.
And that's good, at least.
Well, except when she went to the bathroom and her husband, she drives me crazy. I was like, at least I'm not the only one, But she just, she doesn't think before she speaks. How's that? Like, yeah.
When my children were small, and small as anything before graduation from high school, I had a quick temper. I really did. It was never over the top, but I could get loud and I could get snarky. And now I watch my daughter, who is raising 2 children, one of which is I'm trying to think of one word that would describe this. She's everywhere. She's like, if there's something to do in the house that she could get in trouble, she will. Not because she wants the attention, just because she's curious. What if I put lipstick on the wall? Anyway, my daughter is the opposite of what I did, and I am so proud of her. She'll sit them down, and she'll talk to them, and she'll ask them questions, and like this. And I was just, so it's, and I noticed what my mother did in certain situations, I never wanted to be. So you never want to be like your mom. But now that I'm at this age, I'm proud to be like my mom because she has so many good qualities. So it comes full circle.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also growing in the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm also maturing in Christ. And
And that, again, that makes the difference. Talking about biblical self-control is dependent on the Holy Spirit. So,
plus,
have some of that.
A lot of that time, our lives were out of control, just out of control. So, I think a lot of it has to do with growing in Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thankfully, I haven't had to deal with anybody in a work situation that I would say had a hot temper. So it's been kind of nice to not have to deal with that at that point. But I'm sure there are other people in work situations that do deal with that. And that would be awful. Okay, the third area he talks about is finances. And he says, indulging our desires for things whether we can afford them or not. And that was the key, whether we can afford them or not. So 2 things on finances. If we are not practicing self-control with our finances, how can that affect our tithing?
Tithing goes out the window.
He made the comment in here that, I guess he found it somewhere online, that the average American as of this past year has $7,000 credit card debt on a continuous basis. So yeah, that can be tough. But like I said, he defines it as buying things whether we can afford them or not. But he made a comment later, and I don't know if I agree with him, so I'm going to ask you guys. Is it wrong to buy things if you can afford them? And if yes or no, why?
Probably situational. Like going back to self-control, if buying that something is feeding into the self-control habit that you're having trouble with, like, I can't even, if you have a hard time with competitiveness, I think he talks about it eventually, like, you feel like you always have to have the best, you feel like you always need to, like, be top, and so you've got the means to buy the newest, fanciest car every single year, but that's feeding this other sin of, I need to be the best, I need to be at the top. Just because you can afford the car doesn't mean you should, and the reason you're buying it is because your motive is, I need to look the best, not because, oh, I just think it's a nice car and I think it'd be fun to drive around.
Right.
I think it depends on the motive behind why you're buying it, whether you're a billionaire or not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We had a friend who said, how much is enough? And it makes us think every time I don't need 4 TVs. You can only watch one at a time. It doesn't mean I just have one because there's 2 of us in the house. But shoes. I don't need 3 new pairs of shoes every time there's a sale at Boscov's, although I would love to do that. But you can only wear so many pairs of shoes a season. You know, so it is motive, and it is self-control.
I know, mine's flip-flops.
And God could have a plan for you. Like if you're going and spending it on things that because you can't, oh, I've got the money, I can go do it. What if God had a plan for you to put that somewhere else?
Yeah.
A family comes in need, a house fire happens, and you felt this call on your heart. But if you spent it on yourself, it's like, I don't know, God will never, I mean, he'll still try to help, like, use you in that way and, like, try to get you a forgiving heart, but then you're gonna tell yourself that self-excuse, well, I don't have money now, you know? Like, so I don't know, if you leave yourself open for God to work in you, to be that person, leave the room.
Yeah, and tying that into 2 other things, I don't remember what lesson it was, but I remember it's in here somewhere that he made the comment that Americans in general, and that includes Christians, only give 2% of their earnings to any charitable function, but yet they'll have $7,000 in credit card debt. So there again, where are you going? The other thing I thought about when I was looking at this is going back to, I think it was one of the woes that Jesus put on the Pharisees, where he said to them, you'll take money that you could use to help your parents because they're in need, but you'll instead say, oh, I can't give that to you because it's going into the temple, knowing full well that they get paid from the temple treasury, so it's actually coming back to them at some point. And I thought of that one too when he was talking about this and how it can affect your giving and your tithing and so forth and so on. So yeah, it was interesting.
So I'll work, part of what I do dabbles in people's in financial management. There's a big difference in seeing people who are just frivolous spenders on themselves and because it's in front of them, and people who are planning out the future and thinking on it. And so even people who are spending, you can see the ones who are saving for retirement and then spending in retirement because that's what lets them travel and see their family or lets them do the volunteer efforts that they think is best serving their time or lets them serve their church and things like that. So, just because you're spending, maybe that's what facilitates these good, wholesome things in your life.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just spending frivolously because you need the 5th TV instead of the 4th, I think
Right.
that's where you get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it comes back to your motivation, and like you were saying, did God really want you to use that money somewhere else? And now you don't, not only did they not get the blessing, but you don't get one either.
We've got free will.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
better, for worse.
Yeah, for better, for worse, you're right. Yeah. So yeah, finances can be touchy. Even talking to Christians, finances can be very touchy. And that's why I usually don't talk to people about finances. We had a dear friend that we met in Belize, and they now live in Florida. And he told me one time, he was one like you were talking about, where he planned way ahead for retirement. And we went to visit him once, and he and I were playing golf, and he was telling me that the church they were going to was asking people about their finances and this and that. And he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to tell them. He said, it's none of their business what my finances are. He said, as long as I'm taking care of what I need to take care of with them, why do they need to know what I have in my retirement account?
He was retired. He and his wife
Yeah.
were retired, and that's how they served the Lord. They were missionaries, and they still are missionaries to Belize, but they now live in the States.
Yeah, and they'll go there. I think they've been to South America. He goes and does training on spiritual gifts. Because actually, I went with him when we were in Belize into the prison, and we did a thing on spiritual gifts. Yeah, that was interesting.
There is only one prison.
There is
That's
only
why
one
he
prison
said
in
the
Belize.
prison
Yeah.
in the whole country.
Yeah,
It's a small country.
yeah, and they're actually allowing it to be run by a Christian organization, which is interesting. At least they were. I don't know now. So, yeah. Okay, moving along. The next thing he starts to talk about is envy. And he defined that as the resentful awareness of an advantage enjoyed by someone else. And he talks about jealousy too, and I kind of tie the two of them together based on what he's saying. Because he said it could be envy those with whom we most closely identify. So I'll use myself as an example. If there's another safety manager and now I identify, am I getting envious or jealous of him because he's doing something or other and I'm not? Or we envy them in areas we value the most. So, two verses. If somebody can find Romans 1:29 and somebody find Galatians 5:21.
Romans 5:29.
Romans 1:29.
Well, I was gonna say 529 doesn't make sense.
129.
Okay.
Alright.
Being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness, they are whisperers.
Yeah. Galatians the same, it's the acts of the sinful nature. And envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like, I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Yep. So yeah, it's envy, jealousy, it's all identified in those things that Paul is telling everybody, basically, these are things you need to put away. And envy is a feeling, but now envy can lead to jealousy, which now becomes you have no tolerance for a rivalry. You want to be the best alone at the top above anyone else. And it's a fear that someone is going to be better than you. So again, I tie a lot of these other sins that he talks about back to the beginning under selfishness. So, have you ever had someone become envious or jealous of you in whatever? And if so, what did you do to diffuse it or to stop it?
I don't think I would know.
Well, you might, depending on the situation. It is tough because they may be envious and jealous of you and not really say anything. But I think sometimes if that's the case, what's going to happen is you're going to notice it in their temperament towards you. Okay? In other words, if they think you're doing something better than them that they also can do, that communication, that contact may become a little, may have a little friction in it. What do you think about it?
I think the only time that Jeff and I really ever notice is whenever we go out, we just hold hands. We hold hands all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had complete strangers come up to us. It's, just make comments or something. And we don't even think about it anymore. Like, we're just
That's what we
seriously
do.
just grab hands and
Yeah.
don't even think about it. But yeah, we've had people come up to us and just, oh, how long have you been married? And oh, you love birds. And, I don't know, a strange man told us a very weird joke. I had to think of it one time. It was funny, but we were like, in the middle of a grocery store, we're like, okay. But it's just, it was, I guess we just don't even think about it, and, but whether or not people think, and I know somebody at his job was like, oh, you two still hold hands, I wish my husband would hold my hand, kind of thing. But like I said, I don't think we think about it
I
too.
don't think
Yeah.
that's envy, because I've often said, oh, I like your curtains, because I like them, and I wanted a pair like them, but I don't act on it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
is that wrong? I don't act on it emotionally, I don't act on it physically, I don't dwell on it.
No, you're just making a comment that you do like that. I think in some of the church setting, I think about the pastors who get envious because the church down the road is growing and theirs isn't, which has happened. And same thing with some of the mega churches, as they call them. That stuff kind of creeps in there. But yeah, I think oftentimes if somebody is envious or jealous of you, they're probably not going to come up to your face and tell you. They're going to do something to try and make themselves now better than you. Whether it's do something with the boss or whatever it might be, they're going to try and do something so that they get that top spot back again. And that's the whole thing behind it. Again, like I said, I tie it back to selfishness. They want to be the best, and they don't want anybody to be better than them. So, go ahead. I thought you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, sorry, I couldn't tell if she was too. I feel like maybe for me, it said the word envy doesn't quite click as much. Envy sort of feels more like anger kind of thing. Like I actually get upset about this, but it is pretty darn close to like covetousness or struggles with contentment. Like I might not be upset or petty that somebody else's blinds are nicer, but it doesn't mean I might not leave like really wishing I had those blinds. And then that goes back to so many of these other sins, like you said, that you know, in this American culture we live in, you know, 95% of us could probably just go buy those blinds. Like
Right.
I get not everybody
Yeah.
could, but so then that goes back to the self-control from a chapter ago. It's like, so do we just go buy the blinds? Do we just go in the credit card debt? Or do we sit there and be content
With what you have.
what we have?
Yeah.
I'm seeing how it all links together, and,
Yeah.
and we have to sort of sit with that.
Yeah.
If someone said to me, I really like those blinds, where did you get them? I would want to go get a set.
Yeah.
I would call that to me a compliment.
Yeah.
Do you know? It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
but don't ask me how much you pay. Go find out yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's, I think what you said, it all goes back to contentment.
Yeah.
Paul talks about that in one of his letters, where he says he's content with more, he's content with less. I'm just paraphrasing, but you know, so he said he has learned how to be content with whatever he has. The American culture is not like that.
Yeah.
If you look at the ads, the American culture is, you deserve to have this.
Yeah.
You deserve to have whatever it is you want. So take care of yourself. And that's what the mainstream American culture has become. What did somebody say recently about, well, I know Jesus talked about it too, that in the end times people will be marrying, having parties and doing this and taking care of themselves as it was in the time of Noah. We're getting there because you can see different things that are going on. But that's the American culture. It's, you know, it's the what, just do it, or you deserve this in the ads. So yeah, that has taken away the feeling of people having contentment in what they have. That kind of got lost as we got through the 50s and 60s, and then the 70s came. Yeah.
Even things as simple as like, I want that, save for it, put it on your Christmas list, like that
Yeah.
kind of idea.
Yeah.
No, like you just go buy it. Either
Yeah.
whether you have the money,
Yeah.
or you put it on credit cards, things like that. It's really that struggle that just because I can,
Yeah.
now you got to go back to, is that what the Bible says you should?
Right.
Are you doing it for yourself or for the right
Right.
reasons?
And-
I believe that we learned delayed gratification.
It needs to be a more learned skill today.
Yes, because everything is instantaneous. You can go on
That's
the...
Sesame Street's fault.
You can go... That darn big bird. You can go on the internet and buy everything in 3 seconds
Yeah.
and have it shipped to you. So I look at it, because we went through this with her parents and even my parents, where, like you were saying, we would ask them what we could get them for Christmas. Well, we don't need anything. If we need it, we go get it.
Yeah.
And now we're at that point, and I have to be careful because I can do it, but do I need it? Or is it something I want? If it's something I want, then maybe I'll just let that go. And when my kids ask me what they can buy me for Christmas, I'll say, here you go.
It gives them a way to
Yeah.
feel excited for you.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But if it's a need, that's different. God says he'll provide our needs, not our wants.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference. So yeah, I mean, it can be interesting with that. Yeah. Good.
I think you had asked if you see someone is envious of you, how do you respond, right? Or how do you?
Yeah.
I literally never felt like that happened, except like a month ago, and in that moment, and it was with one of my really good friends, and she shared something on Facebook right after I was with her at a conference, and she was just like, sometimes it was very, just longing, very like, you could tell she's one of those people that just shares her emotions on everything. And I immediately texted her. I was like, what is up? You were fine 2 hours ago when I was with you.
Yeah.
And her response was, I'm just never going to be the person that someone's just going to come up and talk to. She's like, I'm never going to be the person that someone wants to talk to and enjoy their time with and have a conversation. And I was like, what are you talking about?
That goes back to having that beat down spirit we talked about.
Yeah. And she's like, I was with you at the reception. They came to talk to you, but I was the speaker. She was.
Okay.
Oh.
And I was like, and I came up to her to talk with her. I was so proud of her, but yet I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
They were people I didn't know, and they like came and said something to me first, and then said something to her like, hey, nice job.
Right.
And she's like, I'm never gonna be that person. And in that moment, I was like, if only you knew that personality that I'm thankful that I have is also the source of a lot of sin in my life.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I was honest with her about that.
Yeah.
I was like, this is not something to be envious of. I was
Right.
like, quite honestly, I'm a little envious of how successful you are. Sometimes you own your
Yeah.
own farm, you're running your own business, you're somehow doing it alone with a kid and just a powerhouse woman. I was like,
Right.
don't be envious of me.
Mhm.
I was like, this isn't something, and I felt like almost like our relationship could have just like torn at that moment if I wouldn't have. She was hurt,
Yeah.
and I didn't even realize it. And we hung out for 3 days, and
Yeah.
and it was the first day, and I was like, wow, she didn't say a word to me.
Yeah.
I could have ignored it, and she might not have talked to me for a year. And it was just, I've never had that happen before, and I'm so thankful I was able to take a step back and see that. So I think if you're ever in that position, at least for her personality, it was acknowledging my flaws first and like not just saying, oh well, thanks that you think that's something that I'm good at. No,
Right.
like acknowledging your own flaws and just saying I'm working through it.
Yeah.
We're here together.
Yeah.
Like, and then also boosting them up. That I just if it ever happens to you, I'm thankful. That situation went really well because I feel like it could have ruined our friendship unintentionally because she would have just been harboring it.
Yeah.
So.
And the nice thing too was that you kind of worked with her critical spirit that somebody instilled in her by
Right.
telling her all the things you did about what you feel about her.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you kind of tried to build her back up from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes that's what you have to do.
Right. It's just
Yeah.
if it ever happens to you, I don't
Okay.
know. It was a good moment, and I'm glad I experienced it. But I felt really
Yeah.
almost sick to my stomach that she felt like that, and
Yeah.
I had no idea when I reached out to her that it was because it was me
Yeah.
in that moment. So,
Yeah, I mean, that was a good way to handle it, at least. Because you left still with that friendship intact. Whereas I think in some of these instances where this happens, that doesn't happen.
right.
That the other person just walks away. Yeah. It makes it tough. Well, part of this is too that as Christians, we need to remember that we are all members of one body, but we all have different giftings. And I'm sure you know, where Paul talks about not everybody can be a hand and not everybody can be a foot or an eye. So if we spend too much time on envy or jealousy on somebody else, we can lose sight of what God has planned for us with our particular giftings. We're focusing too much on somebody else's. So, I know he talked in here about he was kind of envious of somebody that he knew that was basically in the same job that he is, pastor, writing books, but he was envious because this person got more speaking engagements than he did. So yeah, he kind of dealt with that, and yeah, so it can happen. But again, reading what he had in there, he never told the other person that he was envious of them. So again, that's why I said we may never know. So it's good that she came to you at least and got that out. Yeah. Okay. All right, then we go into competitiveness, which follows
Can I
right
make
along.
one comment about
You sure
envy?
can.
We can envy, like maybe other parents who have raised thinking better kids or something, but you know, then you find out they have just trouble too. Like it's nothing to be envious about. You know, then you're like, oh, can't believe that this happened to this family. You
Right.
know, and there you were envious. I guess does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
like
Yeah, I mean, you can be envious of and jealous of somebody, but you have, unless they come to you like she did, you have no idea what that other person's life
Right.
is really like.
right.
Yeah, they may be better than you at this, but you don't know what the rest of the story is.
Right.
So, yeah. And
The,
good.
the way I learned that was when we lived on Lancaster Bible College's campus. They used to have married student housing on campus. And it was 3 buildings, U-shaped, with a fence at the bottom so the children wouldn't run out to the street. I thought, oh, we're going to live on campus. This will be so good for all of us, you know, to see how other believers live. And I thought it would be like going to the Garden of Eden. It was like living in a fishbowl. It wasn't the Garden of Eden. I learned that all these men who are going to be pastors have trouble too.
Yeah.
You know?
There
And
was no tree of life in the courtyard.
it was like reality.
Yeah.
So-
yeah, and that's
Don't think other
That's it.
people are perfect
Yeah.
families.
when that's exactly it. Sometimes when people are envious or jealous of you, they're not looking at reality. What, like I said, what's really going on in that person's life, they'll probably never know. So, okay. Competitiveness. Is it wrong to be competitive?
No.
I agree. I don't think so either, as long as it's done in the right manner. Because I'm so used to it, I'll use a sports analogy. Sports teams, especially professionals, are going to be competitive. They're being paid to be competitive. But I'll go back a number of years. I used to be a high school football referee. The first 2 years I was refereeing, I did midget football games. I stopped doing them after the second year because we're going back to competitiveness now. The last game I did, we had to throw one coach out because he dropped F-bombs at the official on his sideline. We threw a kid out because he was dropping F-bombs. Now these are midget kids, these aren't high school. And when I went back to my sideline, I had parents over here yapping at me, and I turned around and looked at him. I said, one more word and you're out too. And I came home and told her, I said, that's it, I'm not doing them anymore. Because the parents are worse than the kids when it comes to competitiveness. That's where it goes off the rails. it's fine on a field to be competitive. It goes off the rails when the coaches and the parents go crazy.
Right.
Go ahead.
What I think is interesting, I don't know if you ever watch, like Netflix did the quarterback show and then the receiver show, and but just in general, you'll hear stories once in a while that a couple of these athletes, the only reason, some of them are just naturally gifted and that's how they make the pros, but some of them, the only reason they made it is because they had some crazy obsessed parents that from 5 years old on, they were making it to the pros.
And they pushed them, yeah.
And so on one hand, it's like, yeah, when you're not even a teenager yet, being that competitive is just not good and not healthy.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, when you're a pro athlete, I think we all sort of give and say, it's okay, competitiveness is good. So then where do you cross over?
Yeah.
If you need it at a young age to become a pro athlete, I don't quite know where the crossover is to let that be okay.
Well, think of these Olympians who probably trained from 3, 4 years old doing ice skating, gymnastics, whatever.
They weren't going to get there. Some were, but
falling
most
off
weren't
those
gonna get
3-inch
there.
beams, and somewhere along the line, the parents supported them, and that's fine. If the parents support you, it's when they start to go crazy, and that's when they're either yelling at the kid because they didn't do something right, or they're yelling at the coach, or whatever. That's when it gets out of hand.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the athletes that are gifted, the parents probably in some way were pushing them a little bit.
We're probably a little crazy.
That could very well be, yeah. So, follow up on that one though. I want to get your thoughts on this, because this has been happening lately. What are your thoughts that in a competition, game, whatever you call it, everyone gets a prize?
Of the participation trophy.
Yes.
I think. I don't think you should. Once you get to at least a certain age, I don't know if it's like middle school or whatever. I think
it should be
younger than middle school. Then I think we fully well are acknowledging we got a first, second, and third here. Somebody wins, and to take that away from kids, I don't think is
They
fair.
need to lose gracefully.
Yeah, lose gracefully is a good way to put it.
And again, I even coached midget football, and one year they gave everybody a trophy, and I was like, that's not real life. In life, not everybody gets a trophy or a medal or a bonus or a whatever it is. And I always felt when it comes to competitiveness, yes, let's be competitive, but you can't just hand things out to everybody. And like you said, kids, even adults have to learn how to lose gracefully. And it can happen playing a game. I mean, just a board game, and somebody loses and flips the board up, and because they lost. I don't mind being competitive, but you got to temper it.
When I was in 9th grade, and we went to the championship field hockey, and they were like short sticking us, like hitting us in the calves on purpose, and we lost like 2-1 in overtime. And it's upsetting, but the referees came to our team and just said how what a good attitude that our team had and stuff like that. Like, so much, I guess, what's the word?
No retaliation?
Yeah, well, no, we just kept
Sportsmanship.
playing.
Yeah, just kept playing.
Good sportsmanship,
Sportsmanship,
that was it. And that kind of made us feel good. We didn't take home a trophy.
Yeah.
But we took that home, So.
Yeah, and doing high school football, we knew which coaches were the good ones, where they were actually there to coach the kids And if they had a question for us, they would ask it in the proper manner and not, just be running up and down the field yelling at you. So yeah, you figure it out eventually.
Well, and I think of all these sports players that do interviews and the Christian ones, who thank God first and then their parents. And
Yeah.
what does TV show? They cut the God part out,
Yeah, but I noticed when the Eagles won the Super Bowl and the thing afterwards, they didn't cut any of it out.
Nope.
And 3 or 4 of the guys came
Yeah.
up and said something. Yeah.
I feel like you've been seeing that more the past couple of years. You've been seeing people praise God more the past couple of years, which I don't know if that's just come back around a little more. Some will show it, some won't. I don't have a good answer for it though, but you see when they show the Chiefs in the locker room, the Chiefs in the locker room, they'll always get the team and they'll always get them going to prayer, and then they cut it every single time. And I don't know who's in charge of that or who's doing it, but that does rub me the wrong way.
I'll go back a few years.
Yeah.
Again, and this does tie into competitiveness because you have 2 teams on a football field that are banging heads with each other for 60 minutes. A few years ago, after the games, you would actually see players from both teams around midfield on their knees praying together.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
That's been cut out. Not that they're not doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw high school kids do it from 2 different teams. So
Well,
it's done.
I remember
but-
Tim Tebow. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, he used
Yeah.
to, and the
Yeah.
criticalness
Yeah.
that he would get
Yeah.
for doing that was.
Well, and then I'll go back here. He talks about competitiveness, and this is where I see he's correct, is the urge to always win or be the top person in whatever we do. And to what you said, that person is usually a sore loser. And as an example, in pro football, I'll go back a couple more years. When the Eagles won the first Super Bowl, Nick Foles went looking for Tom Brady to shake his hand, and Tom Brady just ran off the field. Didn't even acknowledge him. To me, that's a sore loser. Just because you lost, suck it up. Yeah. But it's true. That's an example of a sore loser. That's where competitive gets out of hand, because now you can't handle even losing. So, okay. We'll move on from that. A couple minutes yet. I'll try and get through at least this next thing on the page here. So he goes from competitiveness to controlling, and talking about seeking to control others to our advantage or to get what we want. Back to selfishness. So as I read this thought came into my head and I wrote it down. Can a controlling spirit lead to an unteachable spirit? And if so, what happens? If you always want to be in control, are you now unteachable?
It's gonna be harder. Maybe not totally unteachable, but it's gonna be harder for you to hear anything if
Yeah.
you're only hearing yourself.
It comes back to, are you willing to learn from somebody else? Or you got it. I know everything, I'm good. And I want to be in control of you now.
That was so me. That was so me. I had to control the household, the children, my husband, my mother-in-law, whom I loved. And it came, and I learned it from my mother. But once I started understanding what the Holy Spirit can do, I would let go of something and say, okay, God, you're in control of this. Now, that didn't mean I didn't pick it back up all day long and I had to keep laying it down. But the more I would lay things down, the easier it got. And once God was in control of that, great things happened. or something bad would happen to teach me a lesson or to help me grow in another area. But he was always in control, and I just was too afraid to not be in control.
My husband was always homeschooling kids. Of course, you're with them 24/7.
Yes.
So when he would come home from work, it was always still mom. I'm just like,
Yes.
Yeah.
Mom is gone now.
Yeah, yeah.
And he would always feel so hurt because the kids never went to him for anything. I was like, honey, it's just that I'm here all the time.
Right.
Like,
You're there
I think
24/7.
if I hadn't homeschooled, it would have been a different story.
Yeah.
But because they were just with me, they were just used to coming to me for everything, you know. So I think once he understood that, it
It's
was
different.
yeah, like it was okay,
Yeah.
but it was hard for him to,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can see that it would be. So, yeah. And controlling is a little different. Like, you're in a work situation, or you're in some situation. Somebody has to be in control. You know, you have a boss or a manager or whatever. Even going back to sports teams, the coaches have to be in control. Otherwise, you got kids going everywhere and they don't know what to do. But what he's talking about controlling is that it doesn't matter. They always want to be in control. And that's where I think it comes in that that type of person could very well have an unteachable spirit because they think they've got it taken care of. Okay. I think we'll stop there. I have a couple more things about control. But